What's good, YouTube? It's Erratic, and in this video I'm going to be getting Dragon Ball to outerversal. This video will include argumentation, debunks, and rebunks, so yeah, let's just get straight into it. So first, before we even get to the argument, we need a definition and some sort of conditions to set for outerversal in the first place. And in this video, the accepted definition is something that is unlimited bidimensional predicates. And this includes things that lack spatial temporality, as they would be unbound by spatial temporal dimensions. So P1, outerversal, is defined as something that is unlimited bidimensional predicates. And this was already agreed upon. We've already set this definition for the video. And P2, anything that lacks spatial temporal properties is not a member of dimensionality. And P2 is just analytical, and to explain why it's analytical is because if something does not belong to the set of dimensional things, aka things that are characterized by measurable dimensions such as size, length, and time, etc., then dimensional predicates like calling something long or fast in states that refers to our reality cannot limit or apply to it. Being limited by dimensional predicates just means something's properties can be described in terms of dimensions like space and time. Not being a member of dimensionality means that it does not have those dimensional attributes in the first place. So the second clause, which is unlimited bidimensional predicates, is entailed by the first clause, which is not a member of dimensionality. And P3, anything that is not a member of dimensionality is unlimited bidimensional predicates. And once again, that's just analytically true, not only because of the analytical truth from P2 by definition, but also because if a set of dimensional predicates cannot apply or limit to some type of existence, then that would also inherently mean that the dimensional limits also wouldn't apply, because those dimensional predicates are used to represent and depict the dimensional limits that are being applied to the set ontology. And P4, otherworld lacks spatial temporal properties. Now, this can easily just be justified via the prior data we have within the narrative. In this scan, Goku is indirectly saying otherworld lacks temporality, and the deductive reasoning towards this is pretty clear. He's saying time exists in the living world, and that's why he gets exhausted. But in otherworld, this same problem isn't applicable. Since time existing in the living world is true, this would inherently mean that he gets exhausted there. And since he doesn't get exhausted in the afterlife, then it wouldn't entail time. And then there's this other postulation from King Kai, which suggests that otherworld lacks a physical ontology because it's non-corporeal, which would inherently mean it lacks space. If it was corporeal, then he wouldn't be making the distinction. If the afterlife was also corporeal, then this proposition would be false and just unnecessary, since this implies that he is contrasting the corporeal world with his own realm. The afterlife, when a character, especially in these states of affairs, defines a property or some type of world as corporeal, it implies that what lies outside that category lacks the property. And once again, corporeal means as opposed to their spirit, or something that is opposed to being spiritual. If it's talking about a realm, King Kai implying otherwise would just mean that the afterlife is non-physical, and this would inherently mean that it lacks space, because physicality and space are contingent on each other. And this would inherently follow, because if you are not spatial, then your existence would not be contingent on occupying a physical space. This would inherently mean that you do not have mass, volume, or any form of physical extension that would require you to take up space within the physical universe. And now I'll be moving on to the anime statements, since these statements were exclusively from the manga. And yeah, if you think that the manga and anime are deviated continuities, then here are some anime scans. So in the first scan here, when Goku was dead in the Kaioshin realm, when he couldn't be revived by the Dragon Balls anymore, he couldn't go to the temporal world again. And the definition of temporal is just relating to worldly as opposed to spiritual affairs, or something in relation to time. If the afterlife were to be temporal as well, then this proposition is false, because Goku would be in a temporal world by that postulation. So the only way for this to be even true in the first place is by the Kaioshin realm being in unrelation to time, or being spiritual, which would inherently make it devoid of space since it would lack physicality. And these last three scans are literally just the same shit as the first scan. It's the same basis, it's the same justification. Goku is indirectly saying that otherworld lacks temporality, and this is just deductive. He's saying time exists in the living world, and this is why he gets exhausted, but in the otherworld the same problem isn't applicable, since time existing in the living world is true, and this would inherently mean that he gets exhausted over there. Since he doesn't get exhausted in here within the afterlife, then it wouldn't entail time. And to make this easier, you could just argue that space and time are contingent. And the argument for this is going to be that P1, change requires a subject to possess different states or properties fundamentally and analytically. And the reason this is analytically true is because change is defined as a transition from one state or property to another, and without differing states, there is nothing to be changed. And P2, any subject capable of possessing different states or properties must exist within a spatial dimension. And the justification for this is because having different states implies some configuration or some sort of arrangement, and configurations require extension or position, which presupposes spatiality. And even minimal physical subject, like fields or particles, have spatially definable states. At P3, positions exist only within space, and spatial dimensions are necessary for an object to have a location. And the justification for this is just going to be that a position is conceptually tied to spatial coordinates, and the very idea of location analytically presupposes a spatial framework. The justification for P4 is just going to be that types of observations of change require a sequence like before events and after events, and that's what time provides to us, and temporality is like the ordering parameter for non-simultaneous states. And then from that, we can just conclude that time is the measure of change, or the temporal ordering of events that take place within a space. And now stay with me on that, because P5, without space, there are no positions, and therefore no change or deviation between positions. If spatial positions don't exist, then displacement or spatial variation just cannot occur. Thus, spatial change is impossible. And then P6, without time, there is no temporal ordering of positions changing. And this is because even if positions do exist, the change between them requires an ordering of states, which is time and temporality. So without a temporal structure or framework, there will be no sequence of positions and thus no change. Therefore, space and time are interdependent, and when events or change in states are observed, the existence of one logically necessitates the existence of the other. And from P5 and P6, spatial change has already been established to require temporal order, and temporal order presupposes entities with spatially definable states. Thus, both space and time rely on each other and are conditioned. Now, there is this one last argument, just in case someone denies the outerversal definition I proposed in this video and directly tries to use a definition that surmises outerversal means to be transcendent to dimensionality. And we can still use this. In fact, it can just be even like argued as a substitute, because it could just be argued that it's the same as being unlimited by dimensions. So P1, to have dimensional limitations, you must exist within space-time. And this is just going to be analytical, because if you have dimensional limits like size, or like if you had a duration or being located somewhere, they all depend on the framework of space-time. Like you would only have length because of space, and you would only have a duration because of temporality, and you would only have a position because space-time gives you that. Without space-time, these properties have no ground to stand on. So anything that has dimensional limits must be contained within a space. And P2, if X lacks dimensional limitations, then dimensional predicates are inapplicable to X. I'm pretty sure you guys already know why this is the case. If something doesn't have a spatial extension, or if something doesn't have a location or duration, then the language used to describe dimensions doesn't apply to it, because it has no dimensions to be described. And P3, if dimensional predicates are inapplicable to X, then X is beyond the framework of dimensionality. And keep in mind that beyond or transcend, aka transcendent in this context, just means for something to have no jurisdiction over you. If dimensional predicates are inapplicable to X, then it would have no jurisdiction over it, and therefore X would be transcendent. And obviously this wouldn't be talking about power or something spatial temporal, because we already know that space-time would be inapplicable to X. Now we can move on to information that is external to the narrative by the Daizenshu, and that brings us to this statement right here, which tells us that the otherworld transcends dimensions. If we were to presuppose my argument for otherworld lacking temporality, then granting that otherworld transcends spatial temporal dimensions with the prior argument being granted would also entail outerversal, since if you are transcendent while lacking dimensionality, then that limits the interpretation to it just transcending dimensionality as a whole. Since if we were to just take the idea that it lacks time while it has a dimensionality, then we would be affirming a contradiction. So if it is the case that it lacks time, then it isn't a member of dimensionality. And if it is a member of dimensionality, then it wouldn't lack time. So transcending dimensions here isn't talking about otherworld just transcending a finite amount of dimensions, but rather that it transcends spatial temporality as a whole. And here the Chosenshu backs up the idea that it transcends space-time. So when it says dimensions, it's not just talking about dimensions as in context to just worlds. It's literally talking straight up about space-time. Well, so now let's get into the debunks, and we are going to include some mistranslation issues later. But for now, let's just get into the otherworld shit. So people may try to affirm that there is a contradiction and say that the proposition of otherworld lacking space-time is false due to movement occurring and change occurring within it, or that Goku trains and gets stronger. So there must be potentiality in otherworld which entails space-time. And the thing is, this argument, it's not even that bad to use. However, it's only in our model that movement, change, or growth requires temporality or a location to be deviated. However, fiction is a conceived idea by its author, and the reason conceivability doesn't necessitate metaphysical possibility under all circumstances is because we can conceive contradictions or some types of states of affairs that are distinct from anything actual, which again proves how things in real life isn't entailed to necessitate what they usually do in any actual reality or states of affairs in fiction. So this obviously means that fictionalized settings can possess different intrinsic laws that make them distinct from any non-fiction world and any actual states of affairs. So obviously models that exist in fiction, like the universe, for example, a universe with a different fictional setting or a different fictional narrative, can be different and even include contradictions. For example, in some arbitrary verses, the universe doesn't get destroyed if all gravitational force is gone, or that there can be some type of fictional universe with no gravity. And we can conceive this. Like, we can do this shit. And you can use the same logic for people that try to argue that since gravity exists within otherworld, then that must entail space-time. But however, gravity is a model which synthetically necessitates space-time in our states of affairs, which has no intrinsic relations to a fictional setting that has already been established to lack the very necessary properties for gravity to exist. And people keep trying to debunk otherworld having no time by using the scan that talks about 158 days with King Kai is like a few thousand years of training on Earth. And this was just talking about the effectiveness of King Kai's training and comparing it to how much years worth of training it would be on Earth. And the thing is, this doesn't even have to talk about otherworld. He's just saying 158 days with him. Like, sure, this is on otherworld, so it probably is talking about otherworld, but that's not even necessary. And even if it was, it's still talking about the effectiveness on his training, and it's just a comparison. It's literally just comparing how much of a difference it would be if he trained with him. So no, it's not talking about a temporal or conventional flow of time. And now we can get on to the translation issue. People like to go against Goku's proposition about otherworld lacking time and try argue that it's a mistranslation. It's not a mistranslation, by the way. Within this game, within the relevant set of kanjis, Goku is saying Jikan te mono ga aru kono yo, and Jikan means time, and mono ga aru means that there is a thing as such, or that there is such a thing called time in this context, and kono yo means this world. Thus we obtain the translation that in this context, in this world, there is time. And the Daizenshu straight up backs up Goku's claim by saying, according to Goku, time doesn't exist within the afterlife. And I see a lot of pseudo intellectuals try to use an argument that proposes otherworld is spatial because we can see or visualize it, which is retarded for two reasons. One, visual representation of an abstract structure doesn't mean that the structure in question is spatial. We can represent abstract entities without them necessarily being ontologically spatial, since not only can we not accurately depict something like that, but also, like, representation is just the specific format or language used to capture and express that entity for us to conceptualize, in which even within this context has no intrinsic relation to something that is drawn or depicted to be spatial. And two, perceiving something doesn't mean that thing is spatial. Even for humans, we can routinely perceive things that have no spatial extension, like abstract concepts like numbers, mental images, dreams, visions, and memories, etc., right? So, like, you can still see or imagine something within your mind. That doesn't entail dimension. So yeah, that's all I got for this video. Peace.